Right now, somewhere in central Luzon, a farmer wakes before sunrise. He plants rice in soil his family has worked for 4 generations. He will never own that soil. He pays rent to a landlord he has never met, in a system written by men who have been dead for 300 years. This is not poverty. This is not misfortune. This is a design, and the people who designed it are still in power today.
Before Spain arrived, the Philippines had no landlords, not because the people were primitive, but because the concept of owning land, of holding a piece of earth as personal property that could be bought, sold, or taken, simply did not exist here. Land belonged to the barangay, to the community. Families had the right to use it, to farm it, to pass it to their children, but no one owned it, not even the datu. The datu, the chief of each barangay, held power not through land, but through people. His authority came from loyalty, from kinship, from the debts others owed him. The land was simply there, like air, like water. Nobody needed to claim it, because nobody imagined it could be taken. That was the world that existed before 1565, before the galleons arrived, before the crosses were planted in the soil, before the most consequential legal transformation in Philippine history was imposed on a people who never asked for it. What happened next did not just change who owned the land, it changed what ownership meant.
Spain brought 3 things to the Philippines: the cross, the sword, and the title deed. The Regalian Doctrine, imported from Spain and embedded into Philippine law from the very first days of colonization. Its logic was simple and absolute. All land belongs to the crown. Unless the crown says otherwise, it is not yours. In one legal declaration, 400 years of communal land use became irrelevant. The barangay had no title. The datu had no deed. Therefore, in the eyes of Spain, they had nothing. But Spain needed local administrators. It could not govern 60,000 islands alone. So it made a calculated offer to the datus. Cooperate, and your status will be preserved. Help us collect taxes, enforce labor, manage your people, and we will call you the Principalia.
The datus accepted, and in accepting, they made a decision that would define Philippine society for the next 4 centuries. They used Spain's new legal system, Western private ownership, to claim title over the very lands their communities had farmed communally for generations. Fields that had been shared now became personal estates. Rights that had been communal now became hereditary property. The Principalia did not steal from Spain. They stole, using Spain's own paperwork, from their own people.
By the late 19th century, the Catholic Church alone held over 400,000 acres of Philippine land. Vast haciendas, called friar estates, worked by Filipino tenants who paid rent on soil their ancestors had freely farmed. In 1893, Spain issued the Mora Law. Any landowner who could not produce a formal Spanish title within 1 year would permanently lose their claim. The land would revert to the crown. 1 year. To navigate a colonial bureaucracy, in a foreign legal system, in a foreign language.
The Principalia had lawyers. The Principalia had connections. The Principalia complied. The peasants had nothing. And so, legally, quietly, without a single battle, millions of hectares passed from the many to the few.
Then Spain lost a war, and the Philippines was handed, like a piece of furniture, to the United States. The Principalia must have panicked. They should not have, because what America brought to the Philippines was not liberation from the old system. It was a better version of the same one.
America told a good story. It came as a liberator. It brought democracy, elections, public schools, a free press, the rule of law. And in 1903, it brought land reform. The Public Land Act, a new framework for distributing the Philippine countryside. Any Filipino could now claim agricultural land, up to 16 hectares. Corporations, mostly American, could claim over 1,000. But there was a problem built into the foundation. America kept the Regalian Doctrine. All land that could not be documented, titled, and registered remained property of the state. And then America introduced the Torrens System. A registration system designed to give landowners a clean, government-guaranteed, indefeasible title. Once registered, your ownership could not be legally challenged. On paper, a fair system. In practice, a machine that rewarded those who could afford surveyors, lawyers, and bureaucratic access. The poor farmer who had worked a piece of land for 40 years and had no money, no lawyer, no time off work to file paperwork, remained legally invisible. The wealthy Principalia family hired professionals, registered everything, and walked away with permanent, court-protected title to land their ancestors had simply claimed under Spain. America even tried to fix the church problem. In 1904, it purchased the friar estates from the Catholic Church for $7 million. The stated goal? Redistribute the land to the Filipino farmers who worked it. The actual result? The land was sold in large blocks. Blocks too large and too expensive for any ordinary farmer to afford. And so the friar estates, renamed, retitled, legally cleaned, passed into the hands of wealthy Filipino families and American corporations. The Principalia did not disappear under America. They evolved. Because America needed local administrators, just as Spain had, and so it turned to the same class that had always served colonial power, the landed elite. When the Philippines held its first nationwide elections in 1907, every single seat in the Philippine Assembly was won by members of the landed elite, families with roots in the Spanish Principalia. Democracy had arrived in the Philippines, and the first thing it did was hand power back to the oligarchy. Hindi ito aksidente, ito ay sistema. This was not an accident. This was a system. By 1918, land inequality in the Philippines had reached a Gini coefficient of 0.75, a number that placed the Philippines among the most unequal land distributions in the world at that time. And the men responsible for changing it were the men who owned it.
December 1941. Japan invaded. The colonial government collapsed. The Philippine army retreated. And in the chaos that followed,
something happened that no law, no reform, no colonial administration had ever achieved. The landlords ran, fled to cities, sought Japanese protection, collaborated with the occupation government to preserve their wealth and status. And in the countryside they abandoned, the farmers finally held the land. On March 29, 1942, in a forest clearing at the borders of Tarlac, Pampanga, and Nueva Ecija, peasant leaders formed the Hukbong Bayan Laban sa Hapon, the Hukbalahap. They fought Japan. They built a shadow government. They collected taxes, enforced their own laws, and redistributed the abandoned hacienda lands to the tenant farmers who worked them. For the first time in Philippine history, a farmer could stand on ground and say, "This is mine."
It lasted 3 years. When liberation came in 1945, the landlords came back with it. Backed by the Philippine Constabulary, backed by American military suspicion of the Huk's communist leadership. The same farmers who had fought Japan were now disarmed, arrested, and expelled from the land they had briefly held. The haciendas were restored, the titles reinstated, and the peasants, who had been the ones fighting, received nothing. The broken promise did not disappear quietly. It became the Hukbalahap Rebellion, a peasant insurgency that lasted until 1954 and nearly toppled the Philippine government. But that is a story for another video. What matters here is this. The most significant land redistribution in Philippine history lasted 3 years, was done by farmers with guns, and was completely reversed the moment the elite came home.
Independence came in 1946, and the first Congress of the Sovereign Republic of the Philippines was dominated by landowners. Not by accident, by design, because the same families that held land held votes, and the same families that held votes wrote the laws that protected their land. Presidential Decree 27, Ferdinand Marcos, 1972. A land reform program announced with great fanfare under martial law. By the time it was measured, less than 2,000 hectares had been transferred, in a country where millions of farmers owned nothing. CARP, the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program, 1988, passed by a Congress where, by 2013 data, 74% of members came from political dynasties. Families whose roots trace directly to the Spanish Principalia. Sila ang gumawa ng batas. Sila rin ang pinagsilbihan ng batas. They made the law. The law also served them.
The 1987 Philippine Constitution explicitly prohibits political dynasties. Article 2, Section 26. No implementing law has ever been passed. In 35 years. The men who would write that law are the men the law is meant to stop. Iyan ang sistema. Iyan ang katotohanan. That is the system. That is the truth. The farmer in central Luzon will wake again tomorrow. He will plant in the same soil, pay the same rent, to a landlord whose great-great-grandfather received that land as a reward for helping Spain collect taxes from people who had farmed it for free. The datu became the Principalia. The Principalia became the cacique became the congressman. The congressman became the dynasty, and the dynasty writes the laws that protect the dynasty's land. 400 years, 6 colonial masters, including ourselves,
and the same families. Always the same families. The land was never stolen in a single dramatic moment. It was taken quietly, legally, incrementally, by people who understood that the most permanent theft is the kind that looks like paperwork.